Broadcasting from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. This is City News.
Happening tonight in Vancouver.
What has happened in the past few months has been a complete seismic shift in our social fabric of our society in Canada.
Powerful scenes from ceremonies as people reflect on generations of trauma carried by Indigenous people. How those in Vancouver are marking the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation.
If they were here today, they would be probably thinking, wow, the world is actually listening.
The discovery here has rocked and is still rocking the country. The remains of 215 children who never had the chance to go home are on these grounds of the Kamloops to Schwepnik Residential School. We'll hear from the chief at the helm as the discovery was made and wounds were open wide.
Empty promises and hollow apologies will no longer be accepted.
AFN's national chief says she's heard enough platitudes and empty words about reconciliation.
This is City News everywhere.
I think we can't get to reconciliation until we get to truth. Coming here is in form of truth.
People at the Vancouver Art Gallery are taking the time to reflect on this National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, a time to reflect on the generations of trauma carried by Indigenous people in Canada. One new exhibit here on the south side of the gallery remembers those children who never made it home from residential schools.
My mother went to residential school, so, I got to see in firsthand the visible trauma that ensued in her life and consequently in my life from residential school.
Haida artist Tamara Bell says this installation of hundreds of ribbons is a representation of every child lost at residential schools.
So people have been bringing their own ribbons and adding their own ribbons to this. It's a way to honor the children. It's also a way of making a statement, because reconciliation is not just a thought, it's an action. So every action, however small or large, is still an action towards cooperation, understanding, and unity. The other thing that people can add to that is I have a truth and reconciliation basket here, and the basket over here was made with truth and reconciliation testimonies and some of the recommendations and some of the literature from there, and it's interwoven into the basket, and people can put their thoughts, their ideas, their concepts around reconciliation and around truth.
I have a sign with two different things on it. One says, following the lead of Indigenous communities.
Janice Oakley says what's written on her sign are vows she made to herself.
There's the one about following leadership, but then it's about facing the truth of the past and present violence. It's trying not to take it personally, trying to talk to people about how they feel, understanding the violence that has been enacted on, many people's, but today remarking on how it's been, how Indigenous people have been in that oppression.
This is the vigil for the children. The residentials, the ones that didn't make it.
Desiree Simeon is one of 10 volunteers watching the art gallery displays day and night. The vigil of shoes and stuffed animals have been in place since May. That's when the remains of 215 children were discovered at the Kamloops Residential School and awakened the country to the tragedies Indigenous people have known about all along.
I believe the babies woke them up. I believe the discoveries of the babies woke up the world. So this is just the beginning of literally truth and reconciliation. And we can thank the babies for that.
In Vancouver, Keir Junos, City News.
Finally, there's actually something to, provide and show proof that, the stories are real. What happened to them was real. The pain that they suffered and endured was real.
As real as the remains of 215 children buried here. They never made it back home from Kamloops Indian Residential School. And that reality has lit an awakening in the rest of the country to the horrors of Canada's Indian residential school system. 150,000 children taken from their homes, their families, many to suffer physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. Thousands did not survive.
So many of those stories about children missing, burial, incinerators, you just you name it, my grandmother shared it.
When the news broke, all eyes turned to the Kamloops to Schwetmik and Chief Roseanne Casimir at the helm. Feeling the weight of her responsibility to these Indigenous children and families torn apart by the system, her job to guide the community through this moment in history.
And thinking about children, they're buried here. And, you know, the families that it's going to be impacting, it just, it was really hard.
And it was only the beginning for her, finding those families, having those painful personal conversations continue.
There's children from other provinces like Alberta and over into the States and the Yukon. And, you know, reaching out to them and sharing with them directly what had happened.
The 215 here grew to hundreds, then thousands, as ground searches continue to uncover more children at other residential school sites who never made it home.
Our truths are being heard. Next is education. Next is that continued path forward with everyone.
For Casimir, it's time for all Canadians to carry this weight, knowing the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, knowing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
I think that people really need to put in the work. We need to be that change for our children and the future generations. And we really do need to reconcile history, you know, with First Nations and non-First Nations, but also the history of Canada.
And that means reconciling the damage done, the pain inflicted by Canada's residential schools.
For so long, so many of our people, it was a lot of shame. It was grief, it was trauma that they had buried deep within inside of them. And you can see it through the generational impacts that it has caused, especially when you've got loss of language, loss of culture.
Political leaders have their role in reconciliation, so too do all Canadians.
We as parents have a responsibility to ensure that we really be that change for our children. And this is something I know that we can do together. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a long road.
While working to find and honor all the children who never came home and ensuring their history is reconciled with Canada's history, Lights honor those already found. In Victoria, Lisa Eusda, City News.
The Prime Minister is spending the first National Truth and Reconciliation Day on the West Coast. Trudeau's itinerary showed he would be in private meetings in Ottawa today. However, his office confirmed he is in Tofino, spending time with family for a few days. The PMO says the trip follows his participation in last night's ceremony marking the day, and he plans on speaking with residential school survivors across the country today. The Kamloops Quebec say they extended 2 invitations for the Prime Minister to take part in today's ceremonies in Kamloops. The PM's itinerary has been updated to reflect his whereabouts.
Hundreds march in Ottawa in the name of truth and reconciliation. On this first national day devoted to truth and reconciliation, Canadians across the country are wearing the orange shirt and reflecting on Canada's ugly past and efforts to eradicate Indigenous people. But AFN's national chief says saying sorry and feeling bad isn't enough.
We need to see the proof that we are going to move forward with actions. Promises and empty promises and hollow apologies will no longer be accepted.
Archibald was speaking at Kamloops to Secwepemc in BC, the First Nation which discovered 215 unmarked graves at the former site of the Kamloops Indian Residential School. The First Nation has been in an ongoing battle with the Catholic Church and federal government over records that could identify those remains. Cookbee Roseanne Casimir says a recent apology from a group of Catholic bishops is being regarded with skepticism as the church is still withholding records.
The Kamloops Secwepemc and the First Nations with Catholic residential schools have faced persistent problems in gaining the cooperation and support that we require to document and identify the missing and the deceased children.
With respect to the apologies that was given by the Canadian Council of Catholic Bishops last Friday, yes, it rings hollow because we have heard it before. Cookbee Roseanne Casimir says that there's a familiarity to it. Of course there's a familiarity to it because The first of the apologies, which contained virtually the same words, was given in 1991. That's 30 years ago.
Don Worm is legal counsel for the First Nation and worked on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He compares what's happening now to what happened when the TRC sought records. A document dump without indexes or finding aids that could actually help them find what they were looking for.
We were provided simple roadmaps, and often we were restricted in terms of how and when we were able to access those records, with the end result being that many of those records were not at all accessed.
In Ottawa, Xiaoli Lee, City News.
The federal government is saying this is a holiday. Why are they going against it? You know, I mean, it's not like people don't want to stay home.
The first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation is not being recognized as a holiday by the Quebec government. Many politicians across the province holding press conferences unrelated to the day. Montreal police holding another on gun violence. But here at Place du Canada in downtown Montreal, thousands coming together to reflect and hear from Indigenous leaders and asking why Quebec isn't giving them and everyone the space and time they need to reflect.
If everybody knows that this is, you know, the first National Day on Truth and Reconciliation, and they choose to talk about whatever it is they're talking about, it shows that they really don't care about Indigenous people.
People that are gathering, having meetings during our Day of Reconciliation for the children that were found in for residential schools. I think it's sad that there's no support from the Quebec government.
Thursday morning, Quebec Premier François Legault said, quote, "We need more productivity and not a holiday on September 30th. When asked why the province wasn't observing the day, many outraged by his response, calling it an outdated view of what productivity means. Hours later, Legault saying an additional holiday, no matter the subject, is very expensive.
C'est très coûteux. Je pense pas que ça soit nécessaire d'avoir un coût aussi élevé pour faire cette commémoration-là.
And he doesn't believe it's a necessary cost to a day of commemoration.
Quebec doesn't want to recognize this as a holiday, nor do they want to recognize systemic racism. So there's a lot about Quebec that just doesn't want to recognize us flat out.
There's a lot of people out there that I've seen this morning that are kind of sad that they didn't come out today because of they're forced to be at work because of some of them work with the Ministre de la Santé et Services Sociaux, and it's a sad thing that they're not here.
People can hear from the speakers today, become really inspired, want accountability, want to figure out why all these mass graves happen, want answers, you know, send out subpoenas for the people that were running the residential schools, get the truth. That's what we want.
In Montreal, Samsara Rainville, City News.
So we see the Mercedes going for the move on the inside of turn 10, makes it. Next summer, electric race cars will be at a starting line right around here in Vancouver's Falls Creek. Just ahead, Formula E racing and the future of mobility.
The Dutchman is carving his way up the field. The checkered flag falls.
9 more people have died, and there are 749 more cases of COVID-19 in the last 24 hours in BC. 88% of those who are 12 years and older have received their first dose of COVID-19 vaccine, while 81% have received their second dose. There are no new outbreaks in care centers, so that total stays at 22. Burnaby schools are the latest to change their mask mandate and include all students in all grades. This comes after Vancouver's and Surrey school districts chose to extend the mask mandate to kids from kindergarten through grade 3. The decision by Burnaby was made at a board meeting earlier this week.
We were assured by the local medical health officer that the use of masks for K-3 would be an effective layer in conjunction with other layers of protection and other health measures.
New Westminster's school board will hold a special meeting tomorrow at noon to take what it calls a second look at its previous decision, in which it decided not to extend the mandate. Mandates in Surrey, Burnaby, and Vancouver begin on Monday. Vancouver MLA Spencer Chandras Herbert West Spencer Chandra Herbert's West End office was vandalized with hateful graffiti today. Herbert posted a picture on Twitter cleaning what appears to be a swastika off his front door. In his post, he stated in part, "Today, I was reminded again that the work to stop hate and build a better world is 24/7. Thank you to all those who stand up, who speak out, and those who work behind the scenes against racism, anti-Semitism, and homophobia. Thank you to those standing for Indigenous justice." In the late 90s, the sound of Indy race car engines roared through Vancouver's False Creek.
2 decades later, a new generation of electric race cars is poised to speed through the city once again as part of the Canadian E-Fest, showcasing not only the future of racing, but sustainable mobility too.
I want this event to be the same as the Formula One event that is in Montreal, that's been there for 70-odd years.
Canadian E-Fest is set to take place on Canada Day long weekend on the edge of False Creek. For the first time, it brings the Formula E World Championship to the streets of Vancouver.
So Formula E is it's similar to Formula One in that it's, as you can see, sitting next to me, it's a single-seater open-wheel race car. They're driven on city circuits because they're fully electric. So therefore, there's no emissions and there's no noise.
But it's not just a weekend of electrifying car races. The event will feature performances by Canadian recording artists, an esports tournament, and a 2-day conference focused on sustainability. Vancouver City Councillor Sarah Kirby-Young calls it a triple win, saying it boosts tourism, promotes sustainability, and the city won't be paying for it.
But the city is not contributing financially to this event, so the risk is being borne by the organizer. The Formula E committed to a legacy of $50,000 in electric charging infrastructure and charging stations for the city of Vancouver. And that as we rebuild after the pandemic, that we'll be attracting sustainable events like this to Vancouver.
OSS Group President Matthew Carter wants to see an embrace of electric mobility.
Ultimately, and this might not be the right thing to say, and whether we like it or not, our way of mobility is moving towards electrification. So I think we need to harness it, and we need to see how we can incorporate electrifying how we get around and make that work for us in our daily lives.
In Vancouver, Kier Junos, City News.
The Vancouver Canucks marked the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation by having a special guest speaker. Chief Wayne Sparrow of the Musqueam First Nation addressed the team to help educate them on the history of residential schools in Canada.
I think it's incredibly important. It's a big day for Canada. It's a big day for Indigenous people. I think educating everyone in the room is important for us in understanding what happened. I think too for the guys that aren't from Canada, and educating them and letting them understand the history and everything that's gone on in this country and where it's come to now and what's unfolding. I think it's huge, and I think it's incredibly important that we educate ourselves in it.
It was really good to listen to him speak. I'm American, but we don't have this holiday in America, and as I understand, this is the first year in Canada to have National Day of Truth Reconciliation. But for me, it's just about learning and listening, and I think that's what the day is about, is to educate yourself, because there's a lot of things I had no idea. And then for him to come speak, it's one thing to hear the story or you see it on the news or read about it, but when you get to hear face-to-face someone talk about their family, their father, their grandparents, their culture, it just makes it more meaningful and really can open your eyes.
According to reports, the Canucks are closing in on deals with key restricted free agents Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes. Pettersson's contract is reported to be for 3 years at just under $8 million per year, while Hughes is expected to sign a 6-year deal in the $47 million range. Both players have been absent from training camp during contract negotiations.
That's it for City News at 6. For news anytime, you can visit us at citynews1130.com. Your next edition of City News is tonight at 11. Thanks for watching and have a great night.